Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of Timeless Talks with Sam and Jingles. And today we have here Dr. Porter Morgan, who's going to be joining us. And we're going to be talking about some specific subjects. Mainly, it's going to be focused on politics. And the topics for today is understand the global political systems. So, yeah, Sam.
Okay, so before we begin,
Right.
Dr. Morgan,
Yes.
can you please introduce yourself or please tell us about yourself?
So I actually ask all of my students to call me Porter. It never happens, but I do try. I want everyone to know that they are political individuals just like me, and that's part of my credo. But a little bit about myself. I have been teaching here at the University of Utah Asia campus for about, let's see, 3 years now.
Oh, wow.
And before that, it was some years at the University of Utah main campus. So in Utah itself, born and raised with all the good and bad that comes with it. So, right, that's about where I start.
And you have your doctorate in
Political science.
Okay. I had a lot of friends when I was in the main campus at Stony Brook.
Right,
I was there for a year, and I had a lot of friends who were into political science.
right,
And I always wondered like what it was to study political science as a university student or as a subject. And like I always had this fascination with like politics because back where I come from Nepal, like, the
Mm.
politics is it's considered very dirty. It's considered very bad.
right,
People don't really want to get into politics.
right,
Especially like businessmen.
right.
When they try to get into politics, like the people around them be like, "Why are you going into politics? Please don't go into politics. It's kind of bad. It's very bad." So, what do you think of this mentality that has set and like it's just very weird?
Um. Okay, so there is the study of politics, and then there's politics, right? And don't get me wrong, sometimes those do cross. So let's not put them in absolute separate universes. But when we look at the study of politics, we're actually asking about 1,000 questions. This is the best part about it. This is one of the reasons why I love political science. Is guess what? If you want to be a political scientist that looks at the politics of history, you can do that. If you want to be more of a political economics specialist, you can do that. If you want to be a regional specialist, you can do that. You can mix and match. Almost everything can be considered politics that we do, which is why it's so cool to study. But at the same time, why do we have this view? And I think that this is more and more pervasive throughout the world where it's just like, no, don't get into politics. That's where the dirt is. Also, it's don't get into politics unless your dad or mom was big up in politics. Like it has almost become a legacy of an industry. And I do say industry because some politics, they are not a way to be good people and or promote democratic norms or even create a better country. People are getting rich. And that's where it all comes from is this is a corrupt and dirty space. Also, unless you're good at it, you better watch your back if you go into it. Right? So those are quite pervasive. And in the United States, I was on a micro level. Like I worked at the Utah State Senate for
Oh, wow.
a little while because I was exploring. I wanted to see what politics was like, up close but local, right? Not national. Nationals, I know nationals dirty. Maybe local will be a little bit better. Yes, it is a little bit better. Yes, it's still super dirty. So that's when I said, no, thank you. I do not want to go into politics. I was thinking about something like campaign managing. I would be quite wealthy, but instead I went with, the actual study of the thing itself.
Mm. Wait, actually, for a follow-up question,
Yeah.
do you know like so there is politics where politics. Do you think politics just only there could be politics outside of actual politics? For example, certain industry, let's just say, um, education,
Yep.
music,
Yep.
all those kind of stuff.
Yep.
Do you think that also kind of happens?
Politics spreads itself everywhere, period. Now, let's put that into a little bit more perspective. Now we can talk about political science is, in its essence, if you just boil it down to something simple, it is the study of power. So if you're studying power, power's everywhere. Power's in your family. Who has power in your family? That's internal politics. Does academia, universities, do they have politics? Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. They have so much politics. Like, it's who has power where is always going to be a question. But then we say, but how does it fit into the system of governance? And that's what politics is to a lot of people. And that's fair. But does the government get involved in music? Well, how did K-pop come along? It was not organic.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true. That's
They
They
true.
have,
had help.
They have these academies
Mhm.
that they take children from like middle school or even like high school students, and then they
Right?
put them in these academies where they get trained, they get media trained.
Right.
I think it's like sponsored by the government at one point.
At the very beginning, it was government help.
Okay.
So it wasn't a pure market entity that they tried to tell you that it is, right? Instead, there was the Ministry of Cultural Affairs, or Ministry of Culture. Ministry of Culture is here. They actually just like poured money into it. They created stadiums so that you had venues to sing at. They put money into promotion abroad. But that's not to say that there wasn't a tremendous amount of talent and a tremendous amount of work and a tremendous amount of market authority that went into all this. But you do have to actually look at both sides, where it's like, how and are these organic? So is music? No, absolutely not. Also, what music can be heard and where? Sometimes governments can control that.
Yeah, that's true.
So, yes, and that would be just pure censorship, where, or it can be nationalistic censorship. And when I say that, I mean, if you're in certain countries, you'll hear your country's music first, and then maybe some Western stuff on different,
That's
smaller.
true. That's very, very
right?
true. That's very, very true. Especially in Korea.
Right. And so it's quite controlled. Or the movie industry. Why do we get movies in different bursts? And like, you'll have moments where films from Korea, made in Korea, have huge amounts of time before a big hit that already came out in the West.
Mhm.
That's on purpose. It's to give clearance so that domestically their box office shares will win. So movie timing is
Okay.
politics. But so politics can be everywhere. And the government, that's what they do. They regulate. And is that regulation going to always be fair? Absolutely not. So that's where we get politics as well.
Also, that brings up the question about like the types of like political systems,
Right.
and how do you think they differ from each other or like one another?
So it depends on what time period we're talking about.
Okay.
So let's put this into perspective, because we still see some of these things, though we may think that they're antiquated and out of any type of relevance. We see different types of political systems in different time periods. Now, we could go with, like, let's go with some of the beginning, where it's basically you have quote unquote God kings, where these are people who are placed on thrones by some hand of deity. This is religion and politics meeting one another. You had to get the blessing of the church to be king. There were politics going on there, and the church had a ton of power, particularly the Roman Catholic Church, as one of the main examples in Western Europe. But that doesn't mean that that didn't happen in other places, and it definitely did. So we have that as a political system, where you have the mix of a religion with who gets to rule, which is the ultimate question. Then you start getting royal families. We still have those around, don't we?
Yes, we do.
In major countries, and not just England, where they don't really have a say, but they have a social sway. But we do have monarchies still. Okay, so monarchy, that's a political system.
Because, for example, for monarchy, like in Ghana,
Mm.
even like in the past, back a couple of like centuries ago, it was ruled by monarchy, and like there were a lot of like kingdoms, and there are a lot of tribes and clans that still exist.
Right.
So this day, the kings and queens, the chiefs and queens,
Hmm.
I think even though we have a president in Ghana,
Right.
however, when the president gets into the territory,
Ah.
it's still kind of like fall under them because that's their territory, that's their land.
Right.
Whatever most part, whatever they say is probably gonna go.
Right. So the echoes of monarchy still exist, even if you've gotten over it. You're like, oh yeah, we're over monarchy. Reality is, those political systems of the past still are pervasive. They still have power. And so we have to look at not only the present of we elected this president, but the echoes of it. Another one is colonialism,
Yes.
where you don't have your king, you have a governor, most likely, or some version of a governor, but you have no say when it comes to what goes on in your country at all. That also has echoes that still are pervasive today. So that is a political system where you have what is called the metropole. That's the center, meaning like England would be the metropole, France can be a metropole, Portugal metropole, and then you have their colonies, whatever that may be. So, but those days are over, right?
I mean, are they?
Exactly.
Just
But
explain.
because you have the Falkland Islands,
Right.
it's still under the. They still believe it's under the British,
Right.
and then you have the French Guinea, which
Right.
still.
You have these little islands that are super important for naval affairs
Yeah.
that are still under colonial rule. Now, are they okay with it? Sometimes. Is everybody on the island okay with it? No, not even a little bit. So, yeah, we still have that, but I would also argue that we see both the echoes of colonization. So, no, of course it's not gone, but also how much have we started to use economics as the new form of empire? Where it's like, yeah, I'm not controlling your whole country, but I'm controlling the important parts of it and the resources, and I am a company. And my company is not from your country. Shell is a great example. Right? BP, great example. So it's like, how much are we seeing a different version? Now, is that governance? No. Is there politics involved? Oh, yes. Absolutely.
So, actually, do you think within like friend groups there's still like politics within, or let's just say in a specific demographic or maybe some ethnicity? Are there like political stuff that goes between like different ethnic group or like clans in general?
Yeah. Oh, there's still going to be, as frustrating as it might feel, we humans, we create hierarchy very quickly. We are so good at creating hierarchy.
I mean, is it just humans? Because like even animals,
Right.
Even animals, like even like cattle, like cows
Right.
and stuff. Like when they're introduced to a herd,
Right.
it's always the one dominant
Right.
animal that's gonna
Right.
lead everybody else. Like it just gets chosen somehow, some way.
Right.
And as long as things, like living things, especially in humans, as long as humans have aspirations,
Uh-huh.
you have the dynamic of power anyways. It
Right.
has to be there.
Right.
And even like if you think about something that isn't as complex in its thinking as a human,
Right.
or you might just say like lesser creatures, maybe like cattle, or
Right.
I mean dogs and wolves are very intelligent, but like
Sure.
even in like ant colonies, they're like very like the queen is at
Right.
the top.
Right.
You have workers, everybody has their own job, and then there's like a hierarchical system.
Sure.
So I think like the whole world like somehow, some way runs in this hierarchy. Like even
Right.
trees, even
Right.
in a forest, like the tree with the longest roots is gonna live the longest. Is gonna be the dominant place
Right.
there.
And it's all about survival and or how many resources you can take. So as long as that is on the table, someone's going to grab, and certainly under any demographic we look at. And that includes diasporatic communities, right? We all are part of that in one way or another. Everyone in this room, right? We are not home.
Can I ask what diasporatic means?
Diasporatic generally is when war comes to your place and you have to move.
Oh,
So diasporatic communities such as the Jewish people, the Armenian people are also a diasporatic community, but we've had wars all over the world. And Korea was created into a diasporatic community after the 40s and 50s. A lot of people fled Korea if they had any means from either Japan or later the Civil War. So we have diasporic Koreans all over the world, and you've met some of them. I'm sure you're friends with some of them who aren't from Korea but were born and raised elsewhere.
Yeah.
Diasporic communities come into that play, but we are somewhat part of that. But just as foreign people in a foreign land, we see hierarchy all the time. And go ahead.
Would refugees somehow like fall under that too?
Yes, absolutely. And where do refugees tend to fall in the hierarchy? Bottom.
Bottom, yeah.
They don't have like they are seen generally as beggars, and beggars cannot be choosers. But they're seen as less than. They're usually treated as less than. They're usually not allowed, or socially not allowed to work. Politically, usually if you've accepted refugees, it's like, yeah, oh no, they can have a job. Best of luck though, right? The reality is that generally it's very hard. It's difficult to get a job in another country when you're a refugee, whether it's language barriers or whether it's just how your demographic, how your person is seen. Do you have human rights or civil liberties? Probably.
Okay.
Can you exercise them fully? That's the reality, though.
So, going back to the refugee question,
Right.
How do you think the system can be changed for them in terms of like the hierarchy in general? Is there a way, or it's not possible?
I mean, some countries have done it better than others. So we have case studies in which countries have actually created a social space and a social net for people and pathways into being able to be integrated. Will they ever be fully integrated? It's the whole question, and I've asked this in my class. Will I ever be Korean? If I was here for 20 years and I spoke perfect Korean, and I literally have been in Korea longer than my students have been alive, am I Korean?
No.
Absolutely not.
Even if you change your nationality.
Right. What if I have a family, they're Korean, I have do I become Korean? No. Still no. So even if you create pathways for things like education or work training, which some countries have been great with, and this really does integrate communities.
Yes.
Now, there are a couple things that happen though, because let's say you get a large amount of refugees, then suddenly they have democratic rights and they start taking power. Who doesn't like them taking power? Those with power.
Yeah.
No one gives power willingly,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you can get backlash when communities are large enough. When refugee communities are large enough, you'll generally get backlash against that because they start voting. And they start bringing in their own Congress people, or they'll start bringing in their own parliamentary figures, whatever. And then suddenly there's one less person who looks like the dominant culture. So that's also an issue, is where's their democratic representation, or can they ever get it? Because this is the tyranny of the majority problem, right? Where if you are a minority, let's say you're 60,000 people in Korea, right, of whatever ethnic group, you will never get a seat on the National Assembly, ever.
Yeah, that's true.
So your rights have to be protected somewhere else, because your democraticness, your vote, will not change the world. So your rights better be assured somewhere else. And generally is in the courts that we see that. And so is your court system awesome? That's the end game for the refugee. Are you protected? Do you have minority rights? Do you have rights at all? Because you'll never get a law passed that helps you. Unless it's by beneficence. And we don't expect that. We don't expect the largesse and the magnanimity of a person to just like create a law for refugees. Sometimes it happens. It's not like it's never happened ever, but we don't see it as often as one might wish.
Wait, so how does our political system impact like global governance and like international relations?
I mean, sometimes it can change the game, right? Like think of when democracy started, right? Like you have your France, your US, and your UK. They all boiled at different points and at different temperatures, but I mean, that changed the whole world is now far more towards a democracy than it is towards any other political system. Same thing happened with monarchies, right? Monarchies, it turns out, were actually quite resilient for most of human history.
Mhm.
So sometimes you can have these political systems that change the world and the way that we govern or the way that we even understand politics as the whole. So, yeah, you can see political systems changing. I would argue communism did the same for quite some time. It had its run. It's not doing too well, but it definitely had its run. So, yeah, these political systems can change the way that war happens, if it happens, conflict, economics. It can have drastic impacts on what we think of as politics today. So, yeah, huge impact.
But then I have a follow-up
Yes,
question
please.
for that one. But so as you said, like how different political systems change the way the world functions.
Yep.
Democracy is currently one of the most like followed ones, as you said, and it's true.
Right.
But then, do you think every country in the world, like not, I would say like most of the countries that aspire democracy,
Right.
are they ready for democracy?
Ooh, excellent question. Tons of political scientists have tried to kind of dig into this. What we find is no. And this is a political culture explanation where sometimes it's not like democracy is quite malleable. It can fit many, many places very, very well, but sometimes your people are just not socially ready. Sometimes it's because you have been in different configurations. Sometimes it's because you're too divided to agree that democracy should be the way forward, meaning you have too many groups. That can be religious groups, that can be ethnic groups, that can be lots of different kinds of groups. You're just too divided to really come together and say, all right, let's start voting. Because sometimes you look over and you see 4 other groups, and you're like, okay, if we actually do democracy, I'm about to lose. Right? I will no longer have the authority and power I do. Why would I give that up? Again, it comes back to who gives up power willingly? Nobody. So, no, it does not fit at all time periods. And it's not just political culture. We have also seen through, and some of the best case scenarios to look at are failed democracies. Like what happens when they gave it a shot and then they go back to authoritarian rule. And we see those ups and downs. I think Brazil is a really great example. I use it in one of my classes, my comparative politics class, where we see these ups and downs of them like working with democracy, trying populist versions of democracy. Military takes over. Then they have an authoritarian rule for many, many years, and then somebody else comes up. The military hands over the keys to a democracy, a chosen president. Not how democratic is that is always a good question. Not very. But then they slowly inch towards democracy, and then the military gets angry again, takes the keys back, then they release them to another person, and then eventually they democratize. It is.
It just never ends. Like what's going on in Myanmar right now? It's
great case study.
And then especially like I was listening to. Do you happen to know Yeonmi Park?
Not personally.
No, I mean.
No. I know.
Do you know her though? Like, have you heard of her?
Yes.
So Yeonmi Park, do you know her?
No.
Yeonmi Park is a North Korean refugee.
Yeah.
She escaped North Korea. She
I
defected
think
from
I've
North
heard of
Korea,
her. I think I've
and then
heard of
she moved to China, where like the human traffickers and everything, and then she moved to South Korea, and then she moved to the US, right? And she's spoken on a lot of times on like UN platforms or like on podcasts and on YouTube channels.
That's where I've seen her on YouTube a couple times.
And like YouTubes and like there's like YouTube channels and so many other places that she's spoken to.
Right.
And the thing, because I've heard so much of her story, like the thing that hits me the most is that when she tells like how oppressed people are in North Korea, and like I was just imagining, right? Like she was like, people in North Korea are so oppressed that they do not know they're being oppressed.
Yep.
And
that's the final stage of oppression. That's where if you are the oppressor, that's where you want to be.
Mm-hmm. And then so I was just thinking, right? Like that's just a thought that entered my head. I was like, if tomorrow North Korea was to like the regime was to end,
Right.
and democracy was to come in,
Sure.
It's gonna be
how would the people take it? I don't think the people would know what is going on. I don't think the people would. It would just
Right.
turn into anarchy at that one point because all of a sudden, like I remember she was talking about how when she came to South Korea,
Right.
and then like she was buying clothes, and then the person like who she was with, she was like, "Oh, you can choose anything," and she was like, "What do you mean I can choose?
Right. Right.
What do you mean I can choose?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
For the rest of my like for the entirety of my life, I was just given a choice. Like you're like you do this or you don't do this.
Right.
You will never be like, oh, you can do any of these things.
Right.
You never had a choice.
Right.
So when people like that, or from people from communities like that,
Right.
get democracy or get like freedom,
Right.
like I don't think it's going to work. You know?
Yeah, and this goes back to more of a political culture question where it's like, are the people ready? But also I think this is also an interesting, more philosophical end to it is, can democracy be taught? And if it can be taught, then we can make it work in North Korea, right? Or should it be taught as a next level ethical question? But can it be taught? And I believe it can. I also think that, guess what? Oppression can be taught. Guess what? Also, communism can be taught. Communists were actually very, very good at teaching. That's
Oh, yeah.
that's how they basically took China, is
Mhm.
through education. And it's like, all right, okay, but if democracy can be taught, then we can start teaching people slowly what this means. Now, everybody wants it to just be this instantaneous and perfect. Like they just got it right the first time. Isn't that how democracy works? And it's like, no. In most cases, you fail at least once. And I always point to this, again, compared to politics, new democracies are frail.
Yep.
Think-
I can testify to that because
Right.
especially in my country,
Right?
2003, 4, that's when the monarchy ended in Nepal.
Right?
And then when the democracy system moved in,
Uh-huh.
we are still struggling to this day. Like we don't have a term where a president or a prime minister serves the entire term.
Right.
There's always a coalition government.
Right.
It always forms a coalition government, and
Right.
people in power always want to stay in power.
Yep.
They're going to win. People will vote for that one particular person, but somehow, some way, the election always ends up having a coalition government where they'll make some sort of agreement. They'll be like, okay, you can be prime minister for like a year.
Yep.
Then it's gonna be the next party leader.
Yep.
It's gonna be the next party leader. And you know what? Before the public realize, we're gonna dissolve everything again, and then we're gonna just set up our own thing,
Right.
and another coalition government forms. So you just never give the power to the people because
Yeah.
democracy is for the people, by the people.
That's the ideal.
Something like that, right?
But how many of the systems that we call democracies do it?
It's very few.
And I would tend to agree. Very few actually hit it. And sometimes we have, right now, what's really big in the field is democratic backsliding. Hey, you were pretty democratic for a long time, and now it seems like you're really going the wrong direction. America falls into that category
Mhm.
for some people, mainly political scientists, but for some people, just the way they feel is that it's going in reverse, like we're sliding back down the hill. And there's a lot of research going on right now about democratic backsliding. So even once you get there, doesn't mean that you get to stay there either. So young democracies, incredibly frail. And then we also have even old democracies need maintenance. So yeah, democracy takes a lot of work. All governments do. Oppression does too, but mostly by the oppressor. So but we're more thinking about democracies for the moment.
That actually reminds me of a video we were watching in class. I think it was like last semester.
Yeah.
I was taking education and society, and one of the videos we watched was I think China is a communist country,
Right.
and they tried to, for the first thing, they tried to implement a class system, like in
Uh-huh.
a classroom where they're trying democracy.
Yep.
And then they had three students,
Uh-huh. Yep.
trying to run for class captain.
Yep.
That was the first time they were trying to implement something like that in a classroom setting.
Yep.
However, what I realized was like there was this one kid who had like his father was in like higher power.
Right.
So since his father was in the higher power, he was like taught certain thing in terms of like leadership
Yep.
and all this kind of stuff. And then there was this other one girl who was like from a lower class. She didn't really know much. She had the ability to be able to lead the class. but
She
didn't
seemed like
have
a
right
natural
resources.
leader. Yeah.
Yes. And then there was another one kid, in the class who was also like running.
Right.
However, he was more of like a bully.
Uh-huh.
He was more of a bully, but at the end of the day, he ended up being the kid whose dad was a policeman.
Uh-huh.
Who ended up
Right.
being the class captain.
Right. So that actually comes from like a very famous documentary now, right? About this entire happening.
Yes.
And it won a number of awards, and rightly so. It was terrific and well done. But I also asked some of my friends, and I have friends in mainland China. I studied there for about a year, in 2 different universities. I was at Tsinghua University and I was at Nankai University. And I asked my friends about that. They're like, "Yeah, that's kind of funny." Because there's this one isolated classroom. You're like, you know what really happens? I'm like, tell me. I want to hear what really happens. They're like, the teacher picks. There's never this election. The teacher just says, you're a good student, and I know your dad or your mom.
Yeah.
They already have the position. So this whole thing where they're like, yeah, that was kind of like, it's just to at least mainland Chinese. They're like, that was so overblown. That's never the way the system works. They looked at like this one microcosm and they want to say, that's the way it's going to work everywhere. It's like, no. They're like, no, this system never works that way. It's interesting though. It's cool. But I did like to take like, what do mainland Chinese people think of that doc? And they're like, it's just funny.
I mean, talking about China and
Sure.
their sort of view on politics, because they have a very communist, but then at the same time they promote the businesses as well.
Uh-huh.
But it's a sort of a mix of like,
Right.
it's not like purely communist, but
Nope.
then this I don't know how do you say that? It's like a communist, but then there's still like capitalism a little bit there.
Right.
And I don't know what it falls under.
Uh-huh.
But then like Taiwan. Let's talk about Taiwan.
Sure.
Right. So you know how Taiwan was supposed to be eventually into China,
Uh-huh.
like because Taiwan was under the British
Yeah.
for the long time, and then
And
once
the
the British
Japanese.
left, and then it was supposed to be like under 50 years, something like that. Then
That's-
China.
Are we thinking about Hong Kong?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Hong
Yes,
Kong.
I was
Sorry,
like,
Hong Kong.
Taiwan is I'm like, the British didn't ever, the Japanese had.
Oh,
okay.
I'm sorry. I got
So
confused.
Hong Kong, yes, it was 100 years,
Yeah.
was the treaty.
And then, so there was a documentary that I was watching the other day. It was covered by Vice, I think Vice
Sure.
News, and they were talking about how, like, Chinese textbooks in Hong Kong, you know, like the way they promote, like, because people in Hong Kong were strongly against the CCP.
Yes.
There was a mass protest that
Right.
happened, like the whole year sort of thing. A
Yep.
lot of young people
Yep.
left like studying altogether, left their jobs and everything. They
Yep.
moved out of other countries, but some people eventually went to China because they're paying more over there. But I mean, you know, like it's just a thing.
Yeah.
Anyways, and since China saw that as a failing act, like the way they were rushing towards it,
Right.
they are now implementing this tactic that they teach, like this, they engrave this political idea of communism
Uh-huh.
through books in like elementary schools, where
Yeah.
they slowly teach good things about China, where they slowly add a little bit more about this. They
Sure,
add like, hey,
sure.
it's our country, you know, like Chinese is this, Chinese is
We,
that.
and yeah,
Yeah.
it tries to cut out the we're Hong Kongers.
Yeah,
And it tries to make it into a we,
Mhm.
right? Which actually that can be great. Unless you don't like China, in which
I mean,
case it's
it's-
not. And most Hong Kongers, at least demographically, they were not for any type of. They wanted independence.
Mhm.
Now that was never going to happen. That was never like they wanted independence under the British. Never happened there either. Like when we talk about long-term like holdouts, right? One of the longest holdouts of a colony is Hong Kong, where they're like, we get it until 1997. Then the treaty was up. It was a 100-year treaty, and they're like, okay, I guess now we have to give it back. So it's like one of your longest holdouts for colonialism is Hong Kong. So they're like, we're going to get our independence, right? No, I'm sorry, no. The treaty said you go back to the Chinese government. And that's exactly what happened. But they were able to maintain their independence through what was called the Basic Law. That's basically their constitution, right? Very, very British and boring term. But like we can talk about the acculturation of the people themselves. But I think that by far the more blunt instrument that is in play is the extradition treaty.
Mhm.
That's the one that we should really look at, because I don't like the parents are going to correct their children on some of these, what China is and isn't, right? They already have their preconceived notions. And that's going to speak louder politically than any textbook you have in class. This is one of those like proven how are we socialized into politics? Most of it happens in the home.
Okay.
So we have the extradition treaty. The one that you don't see, the one that was behind the scenes, is you have the council, the general council, and that's basically their legislature, right? City legislatures. Think of it as city managers, right? Well, the Chinese very slowly just kept getting their own people put onto this board and kept getting more and more of the share. And they knew if they just waited long enough, they were going to have all the seats. Or not all the seats. They would have enough seats that they could vote in whatever they wanted. That's exactly what happened. So that was the power play. It was the slow replacement of democratic leaders from the past to people who worked for Beijing. Partially because not of all of those seats, a lot of those seats, not democratically appointed. It was appointed through who's the business leaders. Well, once you do that, China wins because all they have to do is pour enough money into into an individual or a company, and then they get to have a seat on that council.
Yeah, actually, I think you kind of like mentioned this topic in one of our classes, the
Probably.
us versus them.
Right. Yeah.
Type of scenario. I think in this case, it's kind of similar because you're trying to create some kind of a us.
Yep.
Like by slowly like implementing them without them actually realizing it.
Yep. I mean, and that's the long-term play.
Yep.
And that's a smart play.
Mhm.
Beijing is not dumb.
Mm.
Except for when it comes to Corona. They really botched that.
But
But Beijing, for the most part, is not dumb.
Mhm.
And they do have that long-term view where it's like, we can just outweight you. They're doing the same thing with Taiwan. They haven't been able to do the same political plays, but they're just like, we'll outweight your cute little democracy thing you got going. But they've already outweighed it, and now at this point, I feel like Hong Kong lost and China has won.
yeah.
So like.
And it was mostly during COVID that all that happened, because it was like nobody cared. It's like, we're all doing with COVID, and they're like, all right, we're gonna take one Hong Kong.
And they slowly slid under the whole idea of like, I mean, COVID, they were really smart with it. Actually, like the way they moved their political gains.
Yep.
Under the COVID, the overnight COVID crisis
Like,
was very smart.
No more protests.
Yeah.
Because we can't be in groups.
Mm-hmm.
And now that's the law. Great.
Even
No more.
There was this big protest that happened with the factory workers just recently. With that was a whole thing because they were getting like locked up. And
Right. Well, that wasn't in Hong Kong though.
No, that was in mainland.
Yeah. That was the Foxconn. Foxconn was the company, right? Where like they had a dude that had motorcycles, little scooters out there, and cut a hole in the fence so that people could escape, which is awesome. But yeah, that entire thing is, again, that factory lockdowns where you now live in your workplace with machines and sleep on the floor and don't get food. Great.
Oh, also, like, what are some of the most effective ways of like promoting like democracy and also like political systems and like developing
Professor,
countries?
before you
Yes.
answer that, can I just add a little thing to this question?
Hmm.
He said, like, what are the best ways to promoting democracy?
Right.
Right. But is democracy the best form of political system that we have?
Oh, actually, I don't think so.
Because we need to talk about that first. Because is it truly okay
All right.
to have democracy?
If
you know?
it always an interesting way to put it is, does it actually benefit the people or not? And does it 100% of the time? Absolutely not, right? But again, this is the Churchill quote, right? That we've probably all heard at one point, where it's, well, and this is me paraphrasing, it's the best form of government except for all the others, right? So, or it's the worst form of government except for all the others, right? So it's like, yeah, okay, is this the best we got? I'm skeptical that it should be put in every place at every time. And it depends on what we're looking for. If you're looking for stability, which most people are, then democracy is always not the best choice.
So what in your idea, like in your opinion, what would be the best, the utopian way of political system? Like what would it be?
No, actually, before you answer, also I think there's a realistic way of looking at things and like a frictional way of looking at things.
Right.
Even though some things may seem like very very perfect, realistically it can never be possible.
Yeah, like one example. Like let's go with the fictional idea of let's just say it's been kind of thrown around. Fictional idea. Direct democracy.
Mm.
So every morning, I just get a text from the government. Here are the laws for the day. There are summaries of laws. You can get into the nitty gritty. Like you can get into like exactly what it says, but I can just vote yes or no on everything.
Okay.
Direct democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Majority wins, and then
right.
Whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Great. That's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Feasible? Yeah. I mean, as long as you have smartphones. Are there holes in that system? Absolutely. But let's just say that it works. Let's just say that, like, not hackable. No one's trying to fix the system, right? Which never would happen. But, like, let's just say that that's the way it works. Well, would that be great?
No, I don't think so.
Right.
Because, like, currently there's the woke culture right now that's going on. There's certain things that, if you really think about it properly, it shouldn't be something that people should be trying to pursue or like pushing on other people, like in terms of opinion wise. However, but since there's a woke culture happening right now, if we were to do like the yes or no type of like voting system, I think it would not be good.
Right, and it's also a product of the time. Or are we? Because we just asked the question like, is North Korea ready for democracy?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think we're ready for direct democracy?
No.
I don't think so.
So maybe we need to teach direct democracy first. If democracy is teachable, maybe direct democracy is something that we can actually be taught. Where it's like, right now, we would be handed that tool, and maybe it's the best form. Like, let's just say it is. But we treat it like YouTube comments. We treat it...
It's like Twitter.
Right, like Twitter. You treat it like any other social media platform where you're just giving thumbs up. Sometimes you just don't care. Sometimes you kind of like the person. Or are we just going to have a direct democracy of hot people? Which I don't think is a good idea. I've seen Instagram. Those people shouldn't be running my country. Ever. But beyond just like the kind of joke of it is like, one of the best forms we have, or one of the best possibilities of the next step, we've kind of already ruined.
Yeah.
So that's one of those, like, if we want to get into the realm of like fiction and then try to apply it, I think that we would actually need to be taught direct democracy before we could really accept it. So it could be great. We could get past these issues. But also, direct democracy is terrifying because you get the tyranny of the majority automatically. Could a majority vote that the minority no longer gets rights or the right to vote? Okay, then it's dead. It's dead. You just killed democracy. Now, can we have any type of instrument or body that makes sure that all human rights are protected in every country? That, if you could pull off that, then it could work. But there's not that either.
Yeah.
So, I think as far as the next step, we're kind of dead in the water. Democracy is the best game in town that we got, but it's not always economically the best thing. It's not always the best for conflict. It's not always the best for every country. It's not always the best for everyone, but it is the best we got.
Do you think progressivism could be a way to like teach people?
Yes. And we have to define progressivism in the more philosophical term than, because in the U.S. it's kind of become a tainted word, right? Progressives are Democrats, are liberals, right? So progressivism, as far as U.S. political culture, that's a tainted term, but the philosophy of progressivism, that is something that we could look at and say, like, you know what, as long as we're maintaining positive freedoms, your freedom to do things like vote, your freedom to do things like If you need to move, you can move. You have the freedom of movement, freedom over your body, big freedoms. And then you suppress negative freedoms, i.e. those small tyrannies in the world. Then yes, if we could start doing that via progressivism, great way to teach. Could work.
Talking about the U.S. and the political system right now in the U.S., what do you think about the current situation going on? With there's so I think U.S. is very like rapidly stepping away from democracy, and there's so much. How do I explain this? There's it's just proxy wars going on within. It's just like, are you left or are you right?
Right.
There's nothing beyond that anywhere now.
Yep.
It's all about either you're on the left or you're on the right.
Yep.
From your Twitter.
Right.
From your social media, where like they have my friend. I was talking to my friend yesterday. He was telling me like he like since Elon stepped into owning Twitter, they were releasing the source code for Twitter files.
Yeah.
And in the source code, you had like boosters, like those tweet boosters that would. And the tweet boosters affected if you were a Democrat or like a Republican, or you're left or you're right wing. It's so heavily based on that. Like, look at the whole Roe v. Wade situation that happened.
Right.
Like, they overturned it, and I never thought that was gonna happen.
No.
Like, I never thought. Like, I was in the U.S. at that time, and I never thought that would happen.
In my lifetime, I was like, nah, we're not gonna go back.
But then, like, all of a sudden, you hear this thing, and boom, it's gone.
And who voted for it?
People?
Nobody. It was a court case. The Supreme Court took it.
It's just
nobody voted for it.
It's just like astonishing at this point. Like, you have. I think I'm gonna answer the question myself right now. But like, I think what has happened here is the media, your news agencies, the media is controlling everything at this point. Whatever is on the media is relevant. Like, how COVID was such a big thing, and all of a sudden it's just gone. Like, there's nothing about it.
Right.
Russia war, like the first few months, coverage.
Right.
Now, nothing about it.
Right.
People are still dying there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and like if you follow politics enough, you're just like, once you hit winters, wars never cease to be covered. They cease to be hot.
Mm-hmm.
There were no bridges blowing up because it's winter. People are cold. You do less in the winter. We all do. So do wars. But then you just never get it. You never pick it back up, right? This is old news now.
It's just crazy to me, like right now, how with the war right now, and recently, like Japan pulled out of American oil.
Yep.
And now they're like leaning towards the more Russia side,
right?
Where they're buying over the budget cap or something like that.
Yeah, and it's because Russia has to sell for cheap right now.
Yeah.
Because sanctions.
And also, like, with this whole thing going on, was it the right political move by the U.S. to do that? Because I think at this point, I mean, we should stop the war. Everybody's against the war. We should stop the war.
Sure.
Like India in particular, like they did not condemn Russia directly.
Nope.
Because
neither did China. China was just like.
Like, I mean, they would be a little outspoken. They would be like, okay, yeah, we should like call for cease of like the conflict and everything.
Everybody says that.
Yeah, but then like in the deeper level, like nobody ever stopped.
Right.
India never stopped. China never stopped.
Right.
Like the supporters like of like the more eastern side never stopped. I think it's also because how people they want to replace the dollar. Everybody's like, especially the countries in the east. They want to replace the dollar. Like China is so heavily. They want to replace the dollar.
They want the renminbi to be the thing, and it's like, well, best of luck.
And because you have the two biggest growing economies in Asia right now, like because America right now is the biggest economy in the world, and then you have China and India following like straight up, and then they're right there. And I think like they really want to replace the dollar, as I was saying, and the political games here are like in a very gray area right now. It's
currency itself is a gray area. Yeah. So, but one of the issues that you have is how many countries do we know of? And nothing. When I say this, I already know the answer off the top of my head. I think there are 2 or 3. But how many countries are willing to peg their currency on the renminbi? Almost no one, right? So until you can get to that type of force, how many countries have pegged their currency to the dollar?
It's like, hold on.
Tons.
Yeah.
That's why the dollar is actually in economics considered its own category of super currency, because everybody's pegged their currency to you. And so unless India can pull that off, no way. Their currency's dirt right now because, well, they pulled some really shifty moves in the past few years. One being
The
the
demonetization thing.
right. Well, when they killed the 100 and the
I was in India that time.
500, right?
They killed the 1,000 rupee notes and
Yeah.
the 500 rupee notes.
Right, but it was like the way they did it was to basically clear out people's bank accounts in weird ways. Only half of the country had anything that they could do with it.
And can I tell you something
Yeah.
really interesting about if you have
Hit
time?
me.
Do we have some time for this or
Mm,
because I
maybe
really
10 minutes.
I really wanted to like
Okay,
emphasize on this
Please.
because not a lot of people know what happened with the whole currency thing
Right.
in India. Because I was living in India, I studied in India for 8 years,
Uh-huh.
and I did my school and everything there.
Sure.
And I was there at that time, like what happened, what really happened, right? And then so the currency, do you know Ambani?
Yeah.
Ambani is like the biggest. He's like one of the richest people in
Yep.
India, and he's probably one of the richest people
in the world,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Ambani, and the whole thing was Ambani launched a new telecommunications
Uh-huh.
thing, Jio,
Mhm.
right? And Jio was so interesting that it was free. You could get a Jio SIM card for like dirt cheap. It was
Yeah.
so cheap, right? And the plans were very, very cheap, like free, almost
Right.
free, right?
Right.
Compared to the other ones, because then in India they had like two major telecommunication companies, Airtel and Vodafone.
Yep.
And they were charging a lot. I remember like for a gigabyte of data, or it's like 250 rupees, something like that. But then
Right.
Jio was like 10 rupees, like 5 rupees.
Right, and you're
And
like,
it was so cheap, right? And I never understood what was actually
yeah,
going on.
because you're like, what's the game?
Yeah, what's the game?
It's too good.
And then the game became apparent when the currency thing happened, when the whole when they demonetized the thing, and people later realized what actually happened was Ambani is rich. He has a lot of like dirty money flying around. Like
Sure.
he probably has a lot of like all that black money lying around somewhere.
Yeah,
So what happened was because apparently Ambani was in the circle because he
Sure,
funds
sure,
the campaign, the Bharat Janata Party, BJP,
yeah.
the Modi Party. He basically funds them, and then
That'll do.
and he is in the circle, and he knew that was coming.
Right,
He invested heavily into Geo.
right.
Currency when everything going like left, right, and center, and this that happened. Geo's successful. Like it just launched. New towers popping up everywhere. Money's clean.
Yep.
Money's clean. He probably invested like $1 billion worth of thing in that company and
Right.
just got clean. It's just like that. So I think, like looking at it like that. So when we talk about democracy, because India is the world's largest democracy,
It
they
is.
have a very, very huge system,
And it's
but then it's very corrupt.
yep,
It is very, very corrupt. Like
surprisingly robust, but very corrupt.
yeah, it's robust, but it's very, very corrupt, and that's why like I'm very skeptical of when it comes to like democracy. Like,
Right.
That's why I don't like to get politically inclined anywhere because I feel like it's
Oh,
just
totally.
so dirty everywhere you go.
So
No matter you go to the communist, it's oppressive.
oh right.
No matter you go to
Well, and
democracy,
they were dirty too,
yeah,
right?
everybody's
Like
dirty.
and it's like monarchy. Well, we know where all the land and money goes to the monarchy. Like the problem is we don't have better alternatives yet.
Hmm.
And certainly throughout this podcast, if we nail a theme that we've talked about a lot, it's basically that people don't have the power that they think they do in a democracy, and
Yeah.
that's part of the problem too. Where it's like, yeah, if you can have one rich guy walk in the door and basically change your currency notes to make them rich and clean the money, then maybe your democracy isn't that great. But still, the things I do believe in, one way or another, any system we look at is the division of power is important. You cannot have one person reign supreme. You have to have that power divided, whatever system you're in. And if you can do that systematically through things like constitutions and separation of powers, then you will have a better system and less corruption than or less oppression
Yeah.
than you do in other systems. Is it corrupt? Yes. Do you want to get involved in corruption? I don't. So we all avoid politics, which is the problem because guess what? We need interested people like you
it's
to be in it.
it's just
The-
like it just gives it a bad reputation.
It does.
That's the problem. Like
Yep.
the way the system is right now, it gives the younger generation a very bad reputation
Right.
of what can be. And even those who are interested in it, right? Like I
Right.
feel that, but the older generation that are already in politics,
Uh-huh.
when somebody new steps in, because nobody wants to give up power,
Right.
so then like they will bend them to their will, and then the new guy who has just stepped in also has the same
Right.
kind of feelings. Like my seniors did this to me, so I have to do it to them now.
Right.
I was bullied when I first came in. I'm gonna bully this
them.
one.
Yep.
Well, that reminds me about boarding school.
Yeah, I was in a boarding school. I studied in a boarding school, and I know exactly how that works. It's just so the whole dynamic is very. I don't understand it. So like it just gives it a bad reputation. I
It
feel.
does.
And I think if you can change this outlook of politics, I think you can actually bring some good change.
Right.
Some
It's-
good change in the world can happen if some people,
Yeah.
if this democratic system functions properly. Like
Yeah. And that's what we need to do. But again, turning the best people in the world who would be the best leaders off of politics initially, that's part of the game of power too.
Yeah.
Right? Make it dirty. If I'm in power and I want to keep power, one, I get rich. Two, I stay in power because people who are good stay out of it. Part of the game.
So, what are some advice you would give to students who are like interested in pursuing like political science and like pursuing like the career field in general?
So there's a lot to be said. There's a lot of good when it comes to if you want to pursue political science as an academic study, then you have to go deep, right?
Okay.
But if you want to actually be involved in politics as a person, guess what? It's not all just the elected officials. It's not all the National Assembly. It's not all Congress. Most of government is the bureaucracy. It's under the president, right? Most of it. And so you getting involved in government work, one, it's a stable job. Two, think of it economically, there's a lot of stability. That's where most pensions exist. That's where a lot of good can be done, though, where you move through the bureaucracy as a good person. Now, I would also say, and I say this to all my students, just you talking about it is good. Like when you talk about this with your friends, whether it's war, whether it's demonetization of rupees, whatever it may be, these are all good moments. So us talking out loud matters. And then because talking out loud leads to either community, which can do things, or it can be the mode and function of ourselves changing through dialogue. So I like talking. I think it is a very functional method of being democratic.
Actually, for me personally, I tend to like to listen more than speaking.
So do I. Though I have to. It's my job.
Yeah. So, for example, one of the main reasons why we started this whole podcast is like we tend to have like conversations about like a lot of like different topics.
Yeah.
And we'd like to get into it, but today was the main thing was like to try to talk about politics because
Right.
we've been meaning to talk about politics for quite a while now.
Excellent.
But I thought, who better else to invite on to have this conversation with than like an actual professor who is like into it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to be here, to be speaking to engaged people. That's all I want in the world, right? So this is wonderful. And I'm grateful to be here, to be quite honest.
So that brings that into today's episode,
Yeah.
and we are very, very grateful for you to take your time to join us, and we look forward to potentially having you a part of this in like in a future episodes,
100%.
Sure.
possibly.
You come up with something wonderful, I'll be here.
No, because as the Jingles was saying, I'm very also interested in politics, but then at
Right.
the same time, I tend not to be politically inclined
Sure.
because of the same reasons. But then, this might change my views. Like,
I
you
hope
know,
so. Again,
This might change my views.
talking does it.
Yeah, this might change my views on it. So yes, I think we should call it a good episode today.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor, for being here. Thank
Absolutely.
you very, very much, and everybody, we'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you.